Today, we're looking at Robert Oster's Graphite. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Retro 51 Tornado with a broad nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what's interesting about this gray is it's made up so much of purples. Now you see it's a very light kind of magenta that works very quickly into a purple. Then we see this very light green and a vivid blue across the top. Really very interesting. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And for the most part, it really looks the same, which makes me feel like there's not going to be a whole lot of resistance when it comes to this ink. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to hold up on a page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, we see that it doesn't hold up too well. It really wants to spread all over the place and become really blurry to read. So I don't know that I would risk that when it comes to important notes for me. And that's very obvious when we look at what happens to water. With only 30 seconds on the page, water mostly lifts all the ink off the page. The little bit that's left behind, that water only had 30 seconds to get rid of it. So I feel that given a little more time, it would go completely away. Now, pen flush does everything that water does, and in fact, nothing extra. So it makes me feel that water's all that's needed to clean this out of the pen because the flush isn't getting us any additional effect. Bleach, as would be expected, completely pulls up the ink from that spot in 30 seconds. It does discolor the page a little bit and leaves some of that blue behind that we saw with the chromatography. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with a realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Robert Oster's Graphite has a viscosity of 1.73, which makes it a very wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 13 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Robert Oster's Graphite has an average dry time of 23 seconds, making it a slower to dry ink. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at some Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It looks black. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It took 14 seconds to dry. It still looks black. The medium, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 21 seconds to dry. It still looks black. This is the tone I would have loved to have had right here. That lighter part. Not all these darker parts. The lighter parts. I'm just really on this ink. Look, Scrubby said we get no color variation. We got no color variation. Smear test says you're going to likely be able to recover it if you smeared it. I'll believe it. Tomoe River. The only spot it starts to bleed through is where I'm putting it on stupid thick. I don't count that against the paper. Otherwise, no bleeding. Yes, we get ghosting. The 1.1. No feather, no spread, no halo, sheen, or shade of this black ink. Nothing about this ever says graphite to me, and I love drawing in graphite. I do way too much stupid stuff with pencils drawing to ever confuse this with graphite. Makes me think Payne's Gray. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, 22 seconds to dry on this black ink. Medium, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, 39 seconds to dry. The scrubby showed us no color variation. We're not going to get any color variation. The smear test says you likely can't recover it, and I'm going to believe that you can't recover it. Rhodia. That's not a bleed spot. That's me being sloppy like so many times before. Otherwise, we have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. I really feel like graphite as a color should be a very shading ink. And it's just not. It really should be. Pencils shade like crazy. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, 16 seconds to dry. The medium, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. I mean, in all these ways it's performing very well. It's just the color that leaves me blah. 23 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows no color variation. We got no color variation. The smear test says you could likely recover it. So I looked at this on TWSBI paper, which gave us no bleeding, minor ghosting. The 1.1 had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. Extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. 13 seconds to dry. I apologize for cracking my knuckles. You know, it is a gray. It is a very dark gray. I keep calling it a black because it's always on the verge of that black. 13 seconds to dry, extra fine. I don't know. Medium, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It is definitely black there. 20 seconds to dry. The scrubby showed us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation. But the smear test says you could likely recover it if you smeared it while you were writing. So I looked at Moleskin. Since I'm unhappy with the ink, why not try it on an unhappy paper? Yes, we get bleeding. Lots of bleeding. Fantastic bleeding. The extra fine with all that bleeding gives us plenty of ghosting or show through or whatever you want to call it. I wrote the top with the medium. The medium had spread. It had amazing feathers. Really. If you like feathering, put this ink on this paper. Take your notes like that. It is awesome the amount of feathers it has. It's great. Big Bird would be jealous. No halo, sheen, or shade. The extra fine, yes, it had spots where it spread. It didn't always spread. Sometimes it spread. If it was a little thicker, it spread. If you managed to have it a little lighter, it didn't. It did feather. Not everywhere, not all the time, but the is feathered very heavily. The end part of quick is feathered very heavily. Dog is feathered very heavily. Seconds is feathered very heavily. But the rest isn't. So inconsistency is its key. It had no halo, sheen, or shade, and it took 5 seconds to dry. Scrubby showed us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation, as if we ever got any. Smear test, I don't know that you could recover it if you smeared this on Moleskin. That's unfortunately what I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Robert Oster's Graphite, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. And I've chosen Krishna's Pacha Avuri. Wow. P-A-C-H-A. Before I get my opinion on this ink, I would ask if you've enjoyed this video, because it's a thumbs very nice, and if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. Dark gray has a lot of magentas to it. Magentas and kind of that lean purpley also. It's very unusual. So what do I think of Robert Oster's Graphite? This is a very, very dark gray. Now, when it comes to something that looks like graphite, I prefer pencils that are more in the 2B and HB range. This one's more of an 8B, which isn't something I use a whole lot. It really, as a gray, is teetering onto black, which for me doesn't really do it, but it doesn't make it a bad ink. Thanks for watching.